evening, and welcome to the Prince Hall Shriners National Community Health Initiative Town Hall discussion on the impact of COVID on communities of color. I'm Dr. Otis Kirksey, honorary past imperial potentate and member of Amen Temple number 37, located in Oasis of Tallahassee, Desert of Florida. I will serve as your moderator for tonight's Town Hall discussion. However, before we get going, I'd like to go over the format of tonight's show. Except for the moderators and panelists, all participants will be muted, and participants may submit questions through the chat link. The question and answer period will follow the moderator's interview of the panel. The aim of tonight's town hall discussion is to empower the community with facts and information that will enable them to make informed decisions regarding COVID-19 and COVID-19 vaccine. The discussion will focus on the following areas: COVID-19 vaccine safety and effectiveness, mental health challenges associated with COVID-19 disease, and COVID-19 myths and facts. To that point, we have assembled a dynamic panel of experts to lead us in this discussion. Our first panelist is Dr. Gervin Robinson. Dr. Robinson is a clinical pharmacist who specializes in critical care and infectious disease. He's an assistant professor of pharmacy practice at the Florida A&M University College of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences Institute of Public Health. He serves as a division director of pharmacy services there. Dr. Robinson received his Doctor of Pharmacy degree from Florida A&M and a master's degree in healthcare administration from the University of Florida. He's a member of Amen Temple number 82 out of the Oasis of Darien, the Desert of Georgia. Welcome, noble Dr. Gervin Robinson.
Good evening, Dr. Kirksey. Thank you very much for this invitation to come and speak to the community on COVID and COVID health in our community. Over the past year now, I've had the opportunity and even unfortunate opportunity to have worked with patients that have suffered from COVID, that have survived COVID, and unfortunately those who have succumbed to COVID. At the end of this program, I hope to bring some information, some knowledge, and even some peace and comfort to those individuals with questions about the disease. Thank you, Dr. Kirksey.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. Our next panelist is Ms. Tracy Yvonne Ford. She's a New York State licensed clinical social worker. She's the owner of T. Ford LCSW Consulting Services, where she provides a variety of mental health and wellness services, including consultation, clinical supervision, social work, licensure test prep, and training. Ms. Ford attended Delphi University, where she received a bachelor's in psychology and a master's in social work. She's worked in public education for 22 years and is an adjunct faculty member at several local colleges and universities. Ms. Ford also serves as a board member of the New York State Office of Profession State Board for Social Work. Welcome, Ms. Ford.
Thank you, Dr. Kirksey, for the warm introduction and the opportunity to serve on this panel. Mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we think, feel, and act. It also determines how we handle stress, relate to others, and make choices. Mental health is important at every stage of life, from childhood and adolescence to adulthood. Adapting to lifestyle changes such as working from home, unemployment, virtual education, the digital divide, and lack of physical contact with family members, in addition to managing the fear of contracting COVID-19, has affected our mental health in one way or another, especially in the African American and Latinx community. It's important that we come together on forums like these to provide information and support regarding this pandemic, and I look forward to this discussion.
Thank you. And our third and final panelist for this evening is Dr. Yolanda Bogan. Dr. Bogan is a licensed psychologist and licensed mental health counselor supervisor in the state of Florida. She has over 25 years of experience working in outpatient, inpatient, faith-based, in higher education counseling settings. For private practice, Dr. Yolanda Bogan and Associates infuses strength-based, culturally competent approaches with evidence-based practice. As a scientist practitioner, Dr. Bogan is a professor of psychology at the Florida A&M University, where she supervises interns in mental health agencies and promotes culturally competent and African-centered clinical practice. Welcome, Dr. Bogan.
Thank you, Dr. Kirksey. I appreciate the introduction.
Oh,
Pleased to serve on this panel this evening. Because we're still in the pandemic and are learning more about the virus and our response to it, I applaud the organizers for sponsoring this program to maintain current awareness as we respond to all of the updates from the CDC. In addition, I appreciate the opportunity to spend time with you to discuss mental health, coping strategies, and resources that can help improve our psychological response to this pandemic. Thank you. Dr. Kirksey?
Thank you, Dr. Bogan. So you see we have a dynamic panel here to discuss COVID and COVID-related disorders. We're going to open up our questions with a question directed at Dr. Robertson. We hear the name COVID, SARS, whatever. Can you please tell us exactly what COVID-19 is?
COVID-19, Dr. Kirksey, COVID-19 is the disease that is caused by what we call a severe acute respiratory virus or coronavirus disease 19, CASAR, which is severe acute respiratory coronavirus, COV, and then of course 2, that's the organism that causes COVID-19. And coronavirus leads to the disease COVID-19, and that is a virus that tends to attack the immune system and causes the body to release certain types of responses. And when the body elicits those responses, the immune system will react with severe reactions of inflammation, as well as severe reactions to fight off the virus that may complicate other organ systems. Individuals that have respiratory disorders or other types of comorbidities, when the immune system reacts with the severe inflammatory responses and severe procoagulatory or proclotting type responses in defense mechanism to fight the virus, that's where we get the complication of COVID-19 from.
Well, great. Okay, just moving on in that same direction, then can I talk about some of the complications that you've been seeing in the ICU and so forth? And also, can you give us a profile of the community or the people who are at greatest risk for developing these complications?
So in some of the aggregate data that was published through the CDC in Morbidity and Mortality Weekly in November 2020, as we've seen millions of patients come through our healthcare system, there are several types of patients that rise to the top. Those patient demographics that rise to the top are individuals that live with the disease states of asthma and COPD, or chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Individuals that have asthma and COPD, they tend to rise to the top of our risk factor group, as well as individuals with asthma and COPD that also live with diabetes or cardiovascular disease, meaning those individuals that have had past heart attacks, those individuals that have had congestive heart failure. Now, when we think about those individuals that are more likely to have critical care stays and those individuals that are more likely to succumb or have mortality associated with COVID-19, individuals that have had a previous influenza or a previous bout with the influenza or the common flu virus that we normally run across, those individuals that have had the flu within the past 2 years, and plus the flu plus COPD and asthma, and then other comorbidities, were much more likely, significantly more likely, to have critical care stays on the ventilator or external ventilator, known as what we call ECMO, ECMO, and to have mortality or succumb to the virus. So that's the profile of those patients, in addition to patients that are African American and Hispanic, which are also disproportionately suffering from asthma, COPD, and diabetes as well. So that African American population, Hispanic American population, and then when we add in the other disease states, those individuals much more likely to have critical care stays and mortality.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, because that community is also the ones who are less likely to have access to the kind of really quality care that they need. Let's change the direction of the question. Let's talk a little about mental health. Ms. Ford, can you tell us how COVID has impacted your patients?
Sure. Yes. So during this unprecedented time, right, of fear, and think of all the steps that we all had to take to reduce the risk of spreading the virus, sheltering in place and social distancing, it's natural to feel increasingly worried, sad, or even isolated. When we're faced with a crisis like this that threatens our health and safety and life, experiencing fear and anxiety can be unavoidable, as they are the mind and body's natural response to danger and uncertainty. And similarly, feelings of sadness and loneliness and grief are natural responses to loss and isolation. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic is triggering a very wide variety of emotional and physical and economic issues. I work with adults and children, and there's extreme distress that's being reported, such as worrying or fear or hurt, anger, along with other symptoms and reactions such as anxiety, depression, fatigue, and difficulty focusing, problematic behavior with young children, and the use of risk coping skills such as substance abuse. The pandemic has also shined a light on the inequality in America. You're thinking about school closures and social isolation have affected all students, but particularly students who are living in poverty. Adding to the damage to their learning, and mental health crisis is emerging as many students have lost access to services that were offered by schools. There's grief over what has been lost and the uncertainty about how to navigate daily life and concerns about what the future holds. Dr. Kirksey.
Thank you. Dr. Bogan, what are your thoughts regarding the impact of the increased isolation on teenage depression and suicide because of protocols put in place due to COVID in your region?
So we often think of the pandemic as being a physical threat, and it certainly is, but it's also a physical threat because of how we respond to it mentally. So in terms of teenagers, as Ms. Ford indicated earlier, with the schools being shut down, a lot of teenagers, and this is being reported by the CDC in terms of the number of ER visits where teens are reporting increased suicidal thoughts and increased suicidal attempts. The lack of access to services, as well as the lack of access to activities that help to define their identities, has been particularly difficult. So when students wrap their identities in their friends, which is very natural, in the arts, in sports, and they're not engaging in those activities, it creates a real crisis in their self-identity. And so because they are still trying to figure out who they are and how they function and how they process and problem solve, they may feel like they don't have anyone to talk to, and that may even include parents and relatives in some instances. And so that's where we're seeing the increase in suicide. And so what I would recommend is that if anyone out there is concerned about a teen or an adult with suicidal thoughts, that I want to share the National Suicide Hotline number. That's 1-800-273-8255. Dr. Kirksey.
Can you repeat that one more time? Repeat that number one more time.
The National Suicide Hotline number is 1-800-273-8255.
Thank you. Dr. Robinson, so we've had so far over 90 million injections of the vaccine given to about 33 million people. And so there's a lot of discussion about the vaccine. We know that a small percentage, 64% of those people who were vaccinated were white. And I think Black vaccinations are like 5 to 7%. So we're lagging way behind. Talk to us a little bit about the 3 available vaccines as relates to their safety and effectiveness.
Okay, I just want to give a little bit of history and background about basic drug development and how vaccines and all drugs are studied. All drugs in the United States go through what we call a FDA phased approach. So the Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, they have a set of criteria, and usually there are 3 to 4 phases that each company has to establish effectiveness and safety in order for that drug to get FDA approval, or in these agents' case, emergency use authorization. So the first 2 products that were FDA or that received emergency use authorization were the Pfizer product as well as the Moderna product. And these 2 products were their what we call messenger or mRNA type products, and they are genetically manufactured to look very similar to the coronavirus strand. And it's introduced to the body in 2 phases, 2-shot regimen, 1 shot for the Pfizer regimen, and then 21 to 24 days later, the second vaccination. Then with the Moderna vaccine, we have the 1 shot, and then there's about a 28-day separation prior to the second vaccine. So that's a 2-shot regimen between Pfizer and Moderna. Then the third agent, which is just FDA, received FDA emergency use authorization last Sunday, which was the Johnson & Johnson version. And it's more similar to our other vaccines, like the flu vaccine, because it actually has, it's a virus. It's not necessarily a replica. It's actual a replication of the actual virus. And it's a live virus, but it's deactivated so that it's introduced to the body makes antibodies to it. So those are the 3 agents currently on the market that have received emergency use authorization by the FDA.
So what about their effectiveness? Is that something that we need to be concerned about?
So all of these agents have, during the phased approach by the FDA, they have to show they have to initially go through the animal control studies, the healthy human studies, and then the humans that are at risk studies. Where they did these phase 3 trials. Now, some people say, well, they didn't study these agents long enough. One of the things that we want to bring to the light about this is that many of these agents by the Pfizer and Moderna, because many of these companies already had similar what we call a moiety or a molecule, because they already had something to work off of. It did not take a long time, because now they were able to look at the actual coronavirus, remap and reshape the coronavirus 19 to their current backbone. And then they manufactured the spike proteins so that they figured out a way to introduce this virus to the body safely, and the body would make antibodies. And so now the next time the body sees the coronavirus again, our body can fight against it. The body can only fight against what it has, let's say, ammunition against. So the body, once it makes antibodies, the next time it fights again, it'll fight much more effectively. So that's how vaccines work.
So we've heard numbers like 95% effective, 94% effective, 85%. Can you kind of clarify that? Because I know some people are kind of confused about that.
So some of the things that we look at this is when we look at the first vaccine, the first shot that you get from the Moderna as well as the Pfizer vaccine. The first leg of that shot for each one of them is only about 65% effectiveness against the coronavirus when the person is reintroduced to that virus. So that's why that second shot is so important, because 2 weeks And it takes 2 weeks for the body to gain that 64% effectiveness. So the first shot gives us, after 2 weeks, gives us about 64, 65% effectiveness with the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine. The second shot is like that big boost, and 2 weeks after that second shot is when we get the 95% effectiveness against receiving against the vaccine the next time. So the next time we see it, we can say that there's a 95% chance that our body will be able to mount a good response without causing major illness or sickness. All right. Same with the J&J, there's a one-shot deal. Now, with that, against severe life-threatening infection, there's about 85% effectiveness with the J&J drug vaccine against that patient having severe life-threatening complications. Once again, that's a one-shot deal. And now we say, well, what's the difference between the one shot and the two shot? Well, we know that many people trying to get people linked to care and staying into any type of care for sequential type components is very difficult. So that one shot, we know that we have that patient compliant. We don't have to worry about losing that patient to care. So there are advantages and disadvantages, but the efficacy for both of those is, for all three of these vaccines, is really good.
Great. Okay, and one more question related to the vaccine, because I just have to get this out. Yeah, some people who think that because the Moderna and the Pfizer are messenger RNA vaccines, that is going to change their DNA. Can you put people to calm and kind of explain that?
Yes, well, you know, none of these, and we've had, because this is the first vaccine that has the mRNA type technology, people tend to think, well, you know, it might do something to our DNA, or it might do something to alter the DNA. Vaccines have been studied, they're safe, they're effective, and many times there are these myths and barriers. What I always say to put people at rest is that we know what the potential of COVID-19 is when there's a potential of death, mortality, especially for the African American community, especially if individuals have comorbidities. However, as of 100 million patients being vaccinated, as of today, we've had 101 million patients being vaccinated. While we may have some, you know, less than 0.1% of maybe some allergic reactions, some small things that might happen, there has not been any major complications associated with these vaccines. So they're safe, they're effective, and I would not we would not worry about the fact that they're going to have some prevent individuals from being pregnant later on, alter the DNA later on in life that might affect you 20 years down the line. Those are just things that we cannot substantiate at this moment.
Okay. All right. And one more question before we move to the other panelists. Should one be concerned about reinfection after having COVID-19 infection, as there are multiple variants out there? And are those vaccines available? I mean, are the available vaccines effective against the variants?
So the first part of that question, we'd have to attack from, there's not 100, we don't know right now if patients, how long the antibodies in a patient who's previously have COVID, how long those antibodies that the body has made can protect the individual from regaining COVID. We're almost up right on about 1 year now, 1 year worth of data, and there's little information that people who've had the coronavirus before, for them to be reinfected. There's little, if any. I've not heard of any data on that. So we have to look at it from that perspective. So it's safe, effective vaccines that prevent. That's what their benefit is. The second question, to that part, Dr. Kirksey, you had one second part to that.
Yeah, the second part was, are those vaccines effective against the variants?
So as of today, and we learn new information, their current ongoing research that goes on weekly, daily, we get reports all the time from the CDC as well as NIH. NIH data right now is saying that the J&J looks right now trends to be very effective against the what do we call it, the variants. However, that may be a reason why the J&J vaccines data may have been a little dilute, because there were some variants in the pool, possibly, but it's very effective against the variants, as well as the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines tend to be very effective against the variants at this moment. There's no data that suggests anything otherwise.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let's shift toward mental health again, and I have a question for Dr. Bogan. So what do you think the potential long-term effects of COVID on people of color with who happen to have mental illness?
Well, I'll start by saying what some of the positive effects have been. And one is that there's been a heightened interest in mental health for communities of color. When we have our icon like First Lady Michelle Obama talk about having a low-grade depression last summer, that really opened the door for people to talk about mental health in positive terms and in acceptable ways. So she created a conversation that we have been wanting to have for quite a long time. We have other icons such as Taraji P. Henson through the Boris Henson Foundation and through her Facebook program, Peace of Mind, where she advances culturally competent mental health. And so she's making mental health a popular thing now, which is fantastic. And so people are less likely to shy away. So I think the positive aspect first is that there tends to be less stigma now around mental health. Another positive that we weren't expecting from the pandemic and mental health is teletherapy. Teletherapy has been around for decades, but many folks did not participate in teletherapy, thinking that it would not be as effective. But the pandemic thrust us into this world of providing services through technology. So while it's not the same as being in someone's office, there are some advantages. One is that you don't have a commute time. Second is it makes therapy services much more accessible, because if a person has a smartphone, then they can engage in teletherapy. The third thing is that people are feeling more comfortable because they can engage in teletherapy from their home, from their cars. So therapy is more mobile now. So it greatly increases accessibility. Because we're still in the middle of a pandemic, we don't really know what the long-term mental health effects are going to be. We do know that there's been significant loss related to humans, and how the loss of our loved ones have permanently changed our family dynamics and our family structures. We know that there's been significant loss because of the economy, because of job loss, because of the schools shutting down, and not just K through 12 schools, but the way that the educational system has changed for K through 12, as well as our college students. We're still reeling, we're still responding to all of these changes. And so I do believe that the mental health impact of all of these issues will be long-term. I do feel encouraged that in the African American community and in the Latinx community, we are talking more about the importance of mental health. And that has a ripple effect, because we know that if people have better mental health, they're going to be able to take care of their physical health even better. So there are some positives and there are some negatives, but I'm feeling hopeful about our future. Dr. Kirksey.
Well, thank you, because I really had not thought about the positive aspects. Yeah, we have struggled as a community to embrace mental illness. It's always been taboo. And so if anything can reduce that stigma and get more people to seek help is definitely a step in the right direction. Ms. Ford, just kind of building on that discussion from coming from Dr. Bogan, what do you see with the mental health? What are the mental health challenges faced by people who have suffered loss. I mean, loss with family and friends, employment, housing, as a result of the COVID-19 infection.
And so I'm going to build on what Dr. Bowden was saying. You know, we all know that COVID-19 has caused us to lose a lot of things that we love and care about, right? So you're thinking about the loss of structure and freedom to participate in any activity that we enjoy, the loss of the way we normally manage emotional and physical closeness, loss of freedom to move around and restricted to sheltering in place. And for some, having to shelter in place with people that we're not comfortable with, and maybe being separated physically from people that we miss. You know, we have the economic and financial losses as well. But there was also loss of milestones that we would normally have in person, right? So you're thinking of weddings or births, graduation ceremonies, vacations, holidays, rituals, conferences that we would like to attend, and even faith and worship. So you have to remember, grief is the emotional and physical reaction for when, and it's when you cope with the impact of loss. Even though it may feel overwhelming and awful, grief is a normal and healthy part of the healing process after you're experiencing a loss. When we're thinking about COVID-19, right, the loss of life is the most devastating instance of the loss that many have faced. And deaths of loved ones without the ability to be by their bedside and give them a rite of passage or celebrate their life in a deserving way has been very devastating for most. Remember, grief as a family process is lost. And grieving as a family during the pandemic has become exceedingly complicated. Thinking of like prior traumatic experiences of abandonment and rejection are intensified at this time. It's also normal to go through a wide range of drifting from clarity to confusion, from one extremity to another. So though grief is a painful experience that you can feel out of control, especially during this pandemic, there could be sustained impact on one's sleep, changes in their appetite that can lead to significant weight changes and low motivation to engage in basic daily tasks. And that's usually a good indication that stress is starting to get away of someone's general functioning. Dr. Kirksey.
Thank you. And following right along, Dr. Bogan, so what kind of coping techniques can you recommend to help deal with such losses?
So there are several coping techniques that I would recommend. First one is to stay connected as much as possible. So staying connected to our family and our friends through texting, through phoning, so we can hear the voices of our loved ones, through FaceTime, so that we could see the nonverbal responses to enrich the conversation. And of course, through these Zoom gatherings like we're doing this evening. So making sure you stay connected is very important. And then I'd also say disconnect from negative stimuli. So negative energy sources, such as turning off the notifications on your phone from all of the news outlets, from the Facebook posts and from the Twitter feeds, because often these types of notifications zap our energy, zap our attention, so that we are less productive and less functional. Looking for opportunities to serve has been found to be very, very useful. Muhammad Ali, if you'll recall, was the one that said, service to others is the rent you pay for your room here on earth. So being a part of something bigger than ourselves is very, very important. You get a twofer with service. It benefits the person who's being served, and it also benefits the person who's serving. I'd also say it's important to maintain our faith. Often we focus on the negative aspects of the situation, but making sure that we share not just our challenges, but also our triumphs is very useful in terms of our psychological, mental health. Our ancestors made it through the Spanish flu. Our ancestors made it through the smallpox, and it was actually an enslaved African that came up with the idea, of course, of putting some pus of someone with smallpox in the open wound of an arm with someone else to help inoculate them from smallpox. So we have our faith to build upon. We have our ancestors to build upon, to give us faith to move forward. And of course, we need to be have gratitude for our experiences. And then I'll also say that all of us have heard of the COVID-15 or the COVID-20 or however much weight you may have gained from being so sedentary all this time. So making sure that we get out and we engage in exercise has mental health benefits. It also has physical health benefits. And I know that some of us have been very, very active, Dr. Kirksey, in being active and exercising, because we know that it improves our digestion and it improves the release of oxytocin and all of these things that help us. And then finally, I'll say, give ourselves a break. Be gracious to ourselves, because this is a very trying time and it's a difficult time. So as much as we can be kind to ourselves, it's important to do that. And it's important to make sure that we're kind to others as well. So those are just a few of the tips that I think would be very, very helpful in helping us to cope.
We just received a question from our virtual audience directed at Dr. Bogan. So stand by for this question. But the question is, actually it's for Sister Ford. Say, how do you foresee high school students coping with trying to catch up when they were already behind? High dropout rates are expected. Daughter Marion Bell, Medina Court 11.
So there has been a lot of conversation about how they're going to be able to support students who have fallen behind. I know there's been conversations in New York, where I'm located, public schools with having enrichment programs over the summer, because they realized that there were students that were not able to get the meaningful education. Some were not able to have laptops. Some were just not able to learn. Could you think of if anyone can remember their first time going to kindergarten, and I do, and being able to sit in class and see your teacher and see your friends, and you had many 5-year-olds who their first day at class was being on a computer. So it is conversations that they are having. If you're a parent, I always say be in contact with your school district to make sure that they're making plans, but hopefully with having programs over the summer to help students catch up.
Great. Okay, man, this is a great discussion. I'm going to shift gears back to Dr. Robinson. This is a question that we get a lot. If I've already had the COVID-19 infection and I recovered, do I still need to get vaccinated with the COVID-19 vaccine? Dr. Robinson.
Yeah, so one of the things about that, kind of what I said previously, one of the struggles is that based on the research, they're comparing this research now by taking blood samples of individuals who've had COVID-19 before, and they're comparing or trying to quantify the COVID-19 antibodies in the patient's body, in the previous patient's body who has had it, versus the antibodies in the patient who has the vaccine.
Bring it up next.
And can you hear me, Dr. Kirksey?
Okay.
Okay, so versus the patient.
Yes, I can.
Okay, so what we have to do is, if you've had the COVID virus before, we still want that patient to get vaccinated, because we don't know how long the antibodies are effective. We don't know how long your COVID antibodies you've had previously can protect against COVID-19. Just like we still are trying to determine how long the vaccine will protect against the virus again. You know, the research is still out. The vaccine may be an annual thing. The vaccine may require boosters at certain intervals of time. That research is still being done. So that's why if you've had coronavirus before, we suggest that you get the vaccine, because we cannot be certain how long your current antibodies protect you.
Okay, great. Actually, we have a couple questions from our audience for Dr. Robinson. Want to bring the first question up for us? So the question is, what do you view will be the long-term effects of COVID on people of color? I think we've addressed that. Let's go back and go again. Is there another one that we have? We already had that one as well. Okay, what percentage of COVID tests turn out to be false negative?
Wow, I can't tell you what that percentage is right offhand. I don't know that right off the top of my head, but we know that there are two distinct tests. All right, we know that there are the rapid diagnostic tests, and usually the turnaround is very quick because this is a rapid diagnostic test, and it's trying to get an idea of the image of the coronavirus. So there are many times when they may turn out to be, they may say an individual is false. They may come out when individuals, say the individual's negative when the individual is truly positive, and they may have some say when the individual is positive when the individual may be negative. And that those things can change, and it depends on the timing. A person can test positive up to 7 days after being in contact with an individual with coronavirus. So sometimes it's the time frame in which those rapid diagnostic tests are taken. The second test is the PCR. The PCR is a much more specific test, and because of its specificity, it has much more greater accuracy. All right. So if we want to be accurate, it takes a little bit longer to get the results. Many times it may take 24, 48 hours, while the rapid test can be less than an hour. The rapid test, of course, is less accurate, but it gives us a quick diagnostic tool. All right. PCR takes a little bit longer. So sometimes we have to think about, well, even if I get that initial test, we still want you to quarantine. And depending on how often you're in contact with large groups, you can be positive still. 2 to 7 days, the body can still become positive because it's a cycle. The body has to get the virus into its body, then the virus has to replicate in the body, and that can sometimes take days, and every person's immune system is different. So there are a lot of reasons for false positives. So I can't give you the percentage that occurs, but the two types of tests, rapid diagnostic, not as accurate, and then the PCR, which is very accurate.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple more questions related to mental health, and then we will open up the questions from our attendees, virtual attendees. So the first question is for Ms. Ford. What is one piece of practical advice that you would give to someone struggling with the decision of whether to seek professional counseling?
Thank you for a very important question. So I always say seeking professional support doesn't always mean that there's something wrong with you, right? It means that you're being very proactive with your well-being the same way that you would do for your physical health. There's something that I always say, that there's no health without mental health. And a lot of times there's a confusion with mental health and mental illness. And mental health is, we all have, right, our mental health. And depending on where we are and what we're dealing with in life, it goes on a continuum, right? And it's normal to experience a variety of emotions, and some are going to be stronger due to COVID-19, as I talked about earlier. However, if you're noticing like there's marked changes in your mood, such as irritability or anger or sadness, or if you're feeling that you're withdrawing from social relationships, or as I say, your ability to feel like your ability to live, love, and laugh, it may be time to seek support from a professional. And you can always speak to your doctor or even your faith-based leader, as many are receiving trainings about mental wellness. Dr. Kirksey.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And a final question before we go to our virtual attendees. Dr. Bogan, kind of piggybacking on that question about seeking counseling, can you explain what culturally competent psychotherapy is, and why is it important in managing mental health issues in communities of color?
So culturally competent psychotherapy provides a trusting, non-judgmental space for identifying, sharing and exploring distorted thinking that African Americans may have because of their adoption of white dominant beliefs and practices. So this is typically not what a person presents with. They usually present with depression. They present with anxiety. They present with the things that you might expect. But through assessment and exploring these issues, then the disclosure of certain kinds of thinking may come to the surface. And so a culturally competent therapist or mental health professional or psychologist like myself would help the person to engage in a deep dive and exploration of how those internalized negative and culturally misaligned thoughts would be addressed, and then build on the cultural strengths of the society that we engage in as a community to support mental health. So again, this is not typically why someone would present initially, but through exploration, through treatment, through working together, then we examine those cultural misalignments to improve a person's overall mental health functioning. So
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm sorry. No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, in addition to that, what I often do in my practice is focus on cultural strengths that may include affirmations, literature, history, spirituality, of course, and other strengths of our culture that support mental health recovery and mental health functioning.
Thank you. So we're about 10 minutes out from the end of our program. We want to make sure we get some questions addressed from our audience. Can we bring up first question from the audience, please? This is for Dr. Robinson. Is it still recommended that you continue to wear a mask and get tested after you've been fully vaccinated?
So, of course, there are a couple of things that it comes to. The first thing I would say is, yes, it is still recommended to wear a mask even after an individual has been fully vaccinated. That question is yes. Yes. And so now let's break down some subgroups of the fully vaccinated group based on some new guidelines that came out this week. For example, if a husband and a wife, and let's say their brother-in-law and sister-in-law have both been fully vaccinated post 2 weeks, and they decide to have dinner together, it is okay for small groups that have been fully vaccinated to now engage in a maskless type environment. So one of the things that we want to be able to do is identify the appropriate group that we're responding to. So the second thing, if we're looking at going out into the public in larger spaces, we do want to wear our mask, even if we've been vaccinated, because the studies have not been confirmed that a person who's vaccinated cannot can carry the virus. Nobody knows whether or not we can't be carriers. So if we've been vaccinated, we could potentially be carriers and pass that to somebody who hasn't been vaccinated. So by wearing a mask as a vaccinated person, we protect the next person who's not been vaccinated.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Something related to diabetes. Okay, so first of all, this is say thank you for this education. So please clarify all of these vaccines went through the. Please clarify if all these vaccines went through the FDA protocol before being introduced to the public.
So as I said before, there are 4 complete phases to FDA approval. And one of the things when you have drugs or anything, especially through the FDA, that provides the first safety and efficacy, which we learn within the first 2 phases. We look for safety and efficacy within the first 2 phases, and then even greater in the 3rd phase of approval. all of these vaccines went through the first 3 phases that we would normally go through, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. There was a preponderance of evidence and statistics that proved these agents to, we use the other term, will the benefit outweigh the risk? There was a preponderance of evidence that the benefit outweighed the risk in the phase up to the phase 3 levels of the trials. And then we have the what we call emergency use authorization. Because of the nature of COVID-19 and this pandemic, it was just as the word said, there was an emergency use authorization, which means that it's more beneficial for us to let these drugs go through as the phase 3 and phase 4 trials proceed. Phase 4 is what we call post-marketing. That's after the drug has been FDA approved. Well, we're essentially in our post-marketing phase right now, if we would say that, because over 100 million patients have received both of these vaccines. And so with this data, anything adverse would be taken out right now. We would know what that is. So normally the FDA would have phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, and they separate them. The other thing I'd say, just one quick point, normally drug companies are paying $50 to $100 million or so at every phase of completion. So when companies are making these investments, upwards of $500 million of an investment, it incentivizes them to know when to cut their studies off sooner. Now, because many companies were relaxed against some of that investment, they were able to continue their studies and not worry about, quote unquote, how much we've lost if a drug is not as safe or as effective. Hence the Merck vaccine. The Merck vaccine did not have as great of safety and efficacy. Merck has since partnered with J&J to help increase the production of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Merck's vaccine didn't make it out of the trials. Merck normally would have probably been on the hook for 200, 300 millions of dollars of an investment. They could have, normally they would, if they found out that in phase 2 that it wasn't effective, they would have cut their losses after about $100 million. So I hate to get long, but that's how the phased in process works, as well as we know that it's a business. But this is a pandemic, emergency use authorization ensued, and many companies didn't have the risk of the financial risk because the government basically said there's no financial risk, we're taking care of everything.
Yeah, great. Okay, one more though. We have about 7 minutes left. Get a couple more questions, and I would like to just let the audience know, if you have a burning question that you want to get responded to, please provide us with your email address, and we will make sure that one of our panelists responds to you with your answer to your question. Next question, please. So what are the statistics on patients with diabetes taking the Moderna vaccine? So let me respond to this particular question. We highly, my specialty is in diabetes management, and it's highly recommended that people with diabetes take this vaccine because diabetes is associated with cardiovascular complications. We found that patients with diabetes are part of that group who have not done very well with a COVID infection. So it is highly recommended that if you have diabetes or any other chronic condition, hypertension, heart disease, you need to take the vaccine. Okay. All right. Next question. Okay. That's it. So we've kind of exhausted all our questions, and what I would first like to do is, just on behalf of the 44th Imperial Potentate John T. Chapman, the Imperial Divan and Imperial Court, and members of the Prince Hall family, I just want to express our sincere appreciation for this distinguished panel. Dr. Robinson, Ms. Ford, and Dr. Bogan, thank you for an amazingly informative discussion on the impact of COVID on communities of color. We know that this is a lift that we all must participate in. I mean, it is life and death too many of our brothers and sisters are dying as a result of COVID. We have to, everyone must bring someone, and that means that, when you get in those small gatherings, you need to talk about this vaccine. Why it's important that we vaccinate our community, because if we don't, man, we're going to continue to go to funerals and so forth. And not only that, it's going to take a longer period of time before life gets back to normal. And I'm ready for some normal stuff. Okay, so just keep that in mind. We want to thank our attendees for coming out this evening, and we hope that you are leaving this program with a little more information, a little more confidence, and a lot less anxiety about COVID and about the vaccine. Thank you and good night.